Under the dim, flickering lights of a luxurious Chicago restaurant, Victor Marshall, a bachelor millionaire, entered, unaware that his fate was about to be upended. He was accustomed to being waited on, his cold gaze drifting over countless anonymous faces. But that evening, his eyes stopped on a boy seated in a corner. The boy's golden hair and sharp stare were an exact reflection of himself in the mirror each day. Stunned, Victor confronted an unbelievable truth. The boy called him Father. From the pinnacle of power, he now faced a secret that could destroy everything. Could a man who lived for fame rediscover the heart he had lost? What secret lay hidden in the boy's eyes? Join us to find out, and subscribe to 30 Millionaire Stories so you never miss an inspiring tale. Victor Marshall, 40 years old, was the embodiment of power and absolute control. From the 60th floor of Marshall Tower, where the glass facade reflected the cold gleam of steel, he could see nearly all of Chicago. This city had once swallowed him whole, but now it lay in his hand as part of his possessions. With a net worth exceeding $2.5 billion and real estate projects stretching from Manhattan to Dubai, Victor was a man who accepted no limits. He built his empire with discipline and ruthlessness, two traits he had learned after losing his father at the age of 10. From that moment on, emotions were banished into the shadows. The only attachment he deliberately maintained was Friday night dinners at Golden Leaf, the only restaurant that preserved the same menu and decor from his father's era. Not for the food, not for the service, but because his mother, Eleanor Marshall, had taught him that an empire was not sustained by money, but by steadfast rituals. Tradition, she said, was the only thing that kept a family from fading with time. In the kitchen at the back of the restaurant, Lily Carter, 32, was bustling through her evening shift. A faded scorch mark from the oven stained her apron, and dark circles lingered beneath her eyes after a week of juggling two jobs. As a single mother to an 8-year-old boy, she was used to sleepless nights and tightening her belt. Yet every Friday evening held a different kind of suffocation, Victor Marshall's presence. Not because she admired him, or because he was a billionaire, but because he was the father of her son, a truth she had concealed for nearly a decade. 9 years earlier, when she was an intern at an event sponsored by Marshall Group, one brief night had changed everything. She was never given a chance to explain. When she sought out Victor at his headquarters, the reception desk barred her way. Security stopped her with wary eyes, assuming she was a gold digger. No one listened to her words. No one read her documents. She was unceremoniously pushed out of the tower, humiliated, and in that instant, Lily vowed to raise her child alone. She never called back, never sent a letter, never sought him out again. Ethan grew up in a small rented apartment, learned to entertain himself, understood that his mother was often exhausted at the end of each day, and never asked about his father. Tonight, as Victor entered Golden Leaf, Lily still felt his footsteps, even though she stood at the far end of the kitchen. He sat at his usual table by the window, scrolling through emails, ordering wine as always. She stepped out carrying a tray of red wine glasses. She fought to keep her hand from trembling as she set a glass before him. Victor did not look up. Those cold eyes had never truly seen her, nor granted her a single chance. She turned away, inhaled deeply to steady herself. But when Victor's gaze happened to flick toward the corner of the room, where Ethan sat alone at a staff table, everything changed. Ethan was engrossed in drawing on a folded sheet of paper. His golden hair and high forehead made Victor pause. The boy looked up in that moment, and their eyes met, sharp, clear, with an uncanny familiarity, as though an unnamed memory had been unlocked from years locked away in his mind. Victor stared, bewildered. The boy's face, was the exact reflection of an old photograph Victor still kept. A picture of himself with his father from the early days on their suburban farm. The way the boy frowned while coloring, the slight tilt of his posture to the left, all of it evoked something Victor could not explain, yet saw so clearly. Lily watched from behind the counter, her heart pounding. She knew what was happening. This was the moment when all her efforts to hide would shatter. Victor said nothing. He set his phone down, his gaze fixed on the child. Inside him stirred a strange array of emotions he could not name. Suspicion, confusion, but also a silent shock, as if the wall he had built around his heart was beginning to crack. He glanced at Lily, his eyes no longer indifferent as before. She knew the moment she had long avoided had finally arrived. It was no longer a secret buried deep, no longer a forgotten face, and now before her stood Victor Marshall, the man who believed he controlled everything, suddenly lost for the very first time. Victor had never experienced anything like this. The boy, his gaze direct, without a hint of fear, stood right in front of him, small in stature yet resolute, without the slightest hesitation, and the question, uttered in that clear, pure voice, made the restaurant seem to stop. "You're my father, aren't you?" Victor froze. He wasn't used to being put on the defensive, much less to such uncompromising bluntness from a child. All the sounds around him seemed to vanish. His heart slowed, yet his mind screamed. That question was simple, but like an arrow piercing the wall of control he had built around himself for 40 years. Almost immediately, Lily appeared. Her face was pale, her movements frantic, as if she wanted to reverse time. She rushed over, wrapping her arms tightly around Ethan, as though shielding him from the truth that had just been spoken. But it was too late. Victor's eyes were no longer fixed on the boy. He was looking at her, and in that look was recognition, slow but unmistakable. A distant night, dim lights, laughter mingling with the wine, and the image of a young woman disappearing the next morning, a face he never believed he'd see again. He jumped to his feet. Saying nothing more, he issued a single, decisive statement. "We need to talk. In my office, right now." His voice was not loud, but it brooked no refusal. Lily silently shook her head. Her arm still clutched Ethan as if maternal instinct were fiercely protecting him from something more dangerous than poverty. But then she felt the gazes of the diners, curiosity, judgment, and the whispering that spread like a slow-burning fire, forcing her to make a choice. Finally, she nodded. She handed Ethan to the manager, her eyes conveying a silent plea, and then followed Victor out of the restaurant. The Rolls-Royce glided through Chicago's streets under a heavy silence. The clamorous city beyond seemed unable to penetrate the dense atmosphere inside the car. Lily stared out the window, her hands clasped in her lap. Victor gazed straight ahead, but inside him, waves of emotion churned. At last he spoke. No emotion, no preamble. "How much money do you want?" That question, which cut the silence, made the air chill further. Without a moment's hesitation, Lily's hand whipped up. The sound of her slap echoed sharply in the enclosed cabin. Victor turned to face her. In her eyes was no fear or weakness, but anger, disappointment, and the pain she had carried for 9 long years. "For 9 years, I raised our son alone," she said quietly, each word slicing through him like a blade. "Do you think I need your money?" Victor remained silent, not because he lacked a retort, but because something in those words caught in his throat. She spoke of the day she came to the Marshall Tower, bearing news of the unborn child, of how she was thrown out of the lobby like a fraud, of the years she had slogged through alone without begging, without a single call back. Each detail felt like a stone thrown against the wall of certainty he had constructed. He couldn't recall it clearly. A girl, a moment, and then she vanished. He had never imagined it would have consequences. And if he did think about it, he'd assumed someone had handled it discreetly. But now, confronting that boy, looking into Lily's eyes, he knew. Everything she said was true, indisputable. Ethan's face was living proof. When they returned to Golden Leaf, Victor said nothing else, only made one request, a DNA test, a necessary move, though in his heart, every question had already been answered. Lily did not reply, only nodded and held her son's hand. They left, and Victor remained, alone in a space that had become unfamiliar. Inside him was an emptiness he had never known. Not from losing control, but because for the first time, he realized he had missed something for far too long. His phone buzzed. A message appeared on the screen. The sender's name sent a chill down his spine. Eleanor. Call your mother immediately. She knows about the boy. Victor sat down, his hands clasped together. A sense of unease spread quickly. His mother, the woman he both respected and feared most, who held more secrets than anyone in his life, was now drawing herself into this story as if she had been waiting for it all along. He stared at the screen for a long moment, not pressing to call. It felt as if he were being watched, as if he were playing a chess game where every move had already been decided. And for the first time in many years, Victor Marshall did not know whether he was the player or merely a pawn. 3 days later, a thin white envelope was delivered to Victor's penthouse. It lay on the glass table, as silent as an unannounced verdict. There were no markings beyond the laboratory's name and the small italicized words, DNA test results. Confidential. Victor stood motionless. The glass of wine in his hand trembled. Each drop of deep red liquid slid silently along the rim of the glass. He did not rush to open it, not because he didn't want to know the truth, but because he knew. Once he read it, nothing would ever be the same again. He pulled out the paper. A single, succinct line of conclusion, but like a cold blade. 99.9% probability of biological father-son relationship. 9 words, yet they sliced through the wall of control he had built around himself his entire life. He had a son, a part of his own flesh and blood, living out there for 8 years without his knowledge. Everything he had believed to be certain, plans, discipline, control, now wavered like the glass in his hand, teetering on the brink of falling. Victor walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing down at Chicago's skyline. The city kept moving, still as noisy as ever, but inside him was a strange stillness. The wind outside could not penetrate the thick glass, yet a chill ran down his spine. He was no longer simply the man of work and power. He was the father of an 8-year-old boy, and he had been absent for all of those early years. The phone on the table buzzed incessantly. A string of messages arrived from Eleanor, his mother, full of question marks and demands for explanation. Victor did not respond, not because he didn't want to, but because he had no words clear enough even for himself. He turned inward, recalling his own father, the man who had left him only with silence and the long shadow of expectations. His father had built an empire but rarely sat at the dinner table. There were birthdays spent alone, fevers with no one to care. Now a question tightened his chest. Would he become that kind of father? As Victor drifted through these chaotic thoughts, an unexpected call from Dr. Harris, his family doctor, made everything pause. The doctor's voice was urgent, leaving no room for hesitation. "Victor, you need to come to the hospital immediately. It's Ethan." In that moment, time itself seemed to stop. He gripped the phone tightly. Everything around him became a muted echo. He arrived at the hospital as fast as he could. Walking into the bright hallway, every gaze faded except for the image framed by the glass doors. Lily seated by Ethan's bedside, her arms wrapped around him. The boy lay asleep, tubes and medical equipment surrounding him. His small frame trembled with each weak breath. Lily's face was frozen, her eyes dry, replaced only by exhaustion and worry. That image pierced Victor like a dagger. He had never felt so vulnerable in his life. Dr. Harris explained. Ethan had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a hereditary condition in Victor's family that had once claimed his father's life. If not properly treated, it could be life-threatening. There was an advanced therapy being trialed in London offering high hope, but the cost was far beyond what a single mother like Lily could afford. Victor did not hesitate. He said he would pay for everything. No conditions, no strings. Yet Lily's gaze remained unmoving. She stood, her voice soft but resolute. "We don't need you." Something in those words weighed heavily on his heart, not because of the refusal, but because the hurt hidden behind her pride rendered any argument meaningless. Victor looked at Ethan, the child who carried half his blood, and saw a fragile life that should not bear the burden of adult mistakes. He wanted to make things right. But now, there was no shortcut, no easy path. He had to prove himself, not with money, but with presence, by showing up, by staying, even if he wasn't welcomed. He left the hospital in silence. No one saw him off, no words of farewell. But for the first time, his footsteps did not lead toward the office, did not return to the soaring tower where power defined his identity. He understood that what he needed to claim wasn't reputation, but an opportunity, not just to save his son, but to save the part of himself that had been abandoned, an identity he hadn't even known he once had. That night, Victor sat in his car for a long time. The engine was off. He did not move. In the darkness of the city, he was no longer the man who controlled everything. He was a father, learning what it meant to be a father. A week later, what seemed to have stabilized quickly became unsettled. Ethan's condition worsened, forcing the doctors to transfer him to the intensive care unit. His heart rate was erratic. His vital signs plummeted without warning. In the hospital's sterile white corridors, the nurse's footsteps grew more urgent. Every time the door to the ICU swung open, every beep from the monitors echoed in Victor's ears. It was no longer a vague fear. It was a real threat. And for the first time in his life, he understood what true helplessness felt like. Victor returned to the hospital every day, regardless of the hour. He no longer wore his impeccably tailored suits. He no longer kept his phone glued to his ear to discuss business. He simply sat quietly in the hallway, day after day, his gaze fixed on the glass doors behind which his son lay among countless IV drips and cardiac monitors. He was not accustomed to waiting, but now, each minute passed as though it would stretch on forever. Lily kept her distance. She did not speak to him, nor look at him, yet she did not stop him from staying. Between her pacing and her exhausted, hollow-eyed expressions, Lily still held tightly to her son with every ounce of life left in her. Her hands never left Ethan's side for long, and each time a doctor emerged, she gripped her hospital gown, terrified of bad news. Victor watched them, and under the hospital's dim, flickering lights, he gradually realized something he had never understood in his 40 years. Love does not come from obligation. It comes from presence, from sleepless nights, from trembling beside a hospital bed, from staying when everything seems to offer no anchor. One late night, When the neon lights dimmed and foot traffic dwindled, Lily emerged from the ICU. There was something softer in her eyes. She sat in the chair opposite Victor, saying nothing for a long moment. When she finally began to speak, her voice was so quiet it sounded like she was speaking to herself. About the years she had raised their son alone. About the nights Ethan had high fevers, with only her and a bowl of cold water. About the times the boy asked why he had no father, and she could only smile without answering. About Ethan's small dream, to become an architect like his grandfather whom he had never met. Victor was speechless. He had never imagined that life. While he had been busy building an empire, Lily had been fighting to keep their son alive, dreaming and believing in tomorrow. When he finally uttered his apology, his voice was hoarse and measured. He did not beg for forgiveness. He simply needed to say it. But Lily only shook her head, not in anger, but in bitter acceptance. An apology changes nothing. And in that look, Victor knew she had endured too much to turn back now. The next day, Eleanor appeared unexpectedly at the hospital. Her hair was still swept into a high bun. Her leather shoes gleamed. The faint scent of expensive perfume trailed behind her, a reminder that she did not belong here. When she entered, the atmosphere shifted. Her gaze drilled into Lily, betraying no hint of sympathy. And soon, words as sharp as knives were spoken. She declared she would take Ethan back to the Marshall estate, where he deserved to be properly raised. She said Lily was unfit, lacking the background, not part of the class able to care for someone with Marshall blood. Victor froze. He had once believed his mother only wanted what was best for the family, but now everything became clear. She did not simply want to control the child. She wanted to recreate the model she had imposed on him. Turn Ethan into another replica, cold, unfeeling, obedient, and successful at any cost. Rage welled up in Victor like never before. For the first time in his life, he stood up to his mother. Not for honor, not for pride, but for a child who needed love, not molding. He said unequivocally that Ethan would live out his childhood, loved with freedom, not conditions. He would not allow anyone, even Eleanor Marshall, to take that away. A decision was made. Ethan would be flown to London for treatment with the advanced therapy. The doctors had made contact, and Victor arranged a medical flight. Lily protested. She was anxious, afraid to leave the only place she knew. But Victor would not back down. This time, he did not act like a man of power. He acted like a father of conviction. Conviction that he must do the right thing, even as he was just beginning to understand what right meant. On the plane, Victor sat facing Lily and Ethan. No one spoke much. The hum of the engines was steady, and in that space lay a silence. No longer hostility, not yet forgiveness, but a beginning. A small spark of hope in a long night. Victor looked at his son, sleeping with his tiny hand loosely clutching his mother's gown. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time he was ready to give everything to see it through, not for reputation, but for the small heart lying between them. At the London Heart Institute, time seemed to stand still. Ethan lay amid state-of-the-art medical equipment, surrounded by Europe's finest specialists. 3 surgeries took place over 6 weeks, each a tense battle between life and the razor-thin edge of death. Throughout that period, Victor donated stem cells without hesitation, without calculation. Each extraction was a journey of excruciating physical pain, yet he never faltered. To him, these pains were a belated atonement, the only way to hold on to the precious thing he had almost let slip away. Lily still kept her distance. She was present, caring for and protecting Ethan with a mother's instinct. But her eyes had not fully opened to Victor. Yet when the bruises on his arms appeared after each marrow harvest, when she quietly saw him stay up all night waiting outside the OR, something in her began to change. He was no longer the cold, powerful man she remembered. In front of her now was a father doing everything in his power to reclaim his son. The long days together in the hospital gradually narrowed the distance. From trivial conversations about Ethan's medication schedule and diet, they began to share more. Victor, once sitting beside the recovery room, recounted to Lily his childhood. The cold apartment with no laughter. The long dinners with his mother where no stories were ever told. The pressure of the Marshall name he bore like an inescapable burden. He did not lay blame, but for the first time he allowed himself to admit that he had spent his life without truly knowing how to love. Lily also opened her heart. She spoke of nights alone, rocking Ethan to sleep through high fevers, of the terror of not knowing whether he would wake the next day. She confessed her endless exhaustion as a single mother who always felt inadequate. And above all, the constant fear that if anything happened to Ethan, she would have no reason to go on. One late night, when Ethan was asleep, Victor found the sketchbook the boy always carried. On each page were rough drawings but filled with imagination, buildings shaped like flames, soaring domes, bridges spanning between two worlds. Beneath each sketch was a clumsy pencil inscription. For Dad. Victor's heart caught in his throat. Without a word spoken, he understood. Ethan did not merely carry his DNA. The boy carried a dream of building, a fragment of the soul Victor had once buried beneath the bricks of ambition. And in that silent moment, Victor vowed, with every ounce of his remaining humanity, that this boy would not grow up in the coldness Victor himself had endured. From Chicago, Eleanor pressed relentlessly. She sent lawyers to London, citing a clause in her ex-husband's will, demanding custody of Ethan on the grounds of securing the future for her grandson bearing the Marshall name. But this time, Victor did not back down. With Lily's support, he provided ample evidence, testimonies, and medical records to prove that Ethan was being properly cared for and that the boy needed peace, not control. In the end, the London court ruled in their favor. Eleanor lost. Custody remained intact. Ethan stayed with the two people he trusted most. The good news arrived like a miracle. Ethan recovered more swiftly than expected. His cardiac markers stabilized. His immune system responded well to the treatment. The doctors said such recoveries were rare, but not impossible. Perhaps it was love that became part of the healing medicine. Returning to Chicago, everything had changed. There were no more urgent phone calls, no more midnight trips to the hospital. Instead, there was a simple but warm birthday celebration at Golden Leaf, where it all began. The restaurant was decorated with balloons, soft golden lights filling the air. Beside the large cake sat small gifts wrapped in craft paper. Children's laughter echoed throughout the room. Ethan stood among friends, his cheeks flushed, his smile radiant as sunshine. Victor stood beside Lily, his eyes never leaving the moment as the boy leaned over to blow out 9 candles. He had once dreamed of success, once dreamed of power, once believed that everything in life could be conquered with will and money, but never had he imagined that happiness could be something so quiet and humble, a small hand clasped in his, a trusting gaze, a woman beside him needing no words, only presence. In that moment, Victor was no longer a solitary man atop a glass tower. He was Ethan's father, a companion to Lily, a man learning how to love, not by reason, but by heart. Victor and Lily's story is proof that even hearts once frozen to feelings can soften when faced with truth and love. From a man who lived atop the pinnacle of power, surrounded by numbers and strategies, Victor was brought back down to earth by the simplest of things, a child who carried his own reflection in her eyes. Ethan didn't merely change the way Victor saw the world. He forced him to confront himself. In that innocent gaze, he saw everything he had once lacked: warmth, faith, and a chance to love unconditionally. Lily did not enter his life with blame, but with silence and resilience. It was that very silence, that calm born of nameless sacrifice, which compelled Victor to listen. Through every sleepless night spent beside Ethan's hospital bed, through each moment they clung to fragile hope together, Lily made him understand that family is not defined by power or legacy, but by unseen things: forgiveness, presence, and the courage to begin again. Their journey didn't start with perfection, but with brokenness. Yet in that brokenness, they found a second chance, a luxury almost impossible for those accustomed to hiding emotions behind a defensive wall. And when Victor let go of everything he once believed constituted value, he found something far more precious: a family. To you, our audience in the United States, let this story touch something within your heart. For sometimes, the only thing standing between us and a better life is the courage to forgive and start anew. Subscribe to 30 Millionaire Stories to continue following more inspiring tales. Share this story and leave your thoughts below, because when we retell these stories, we help to heal ourselves and the world.